What we don't also realize these days is that the majority of what we eat is not actually food, it's food like substance, right? And it's marketed as to us in many ways. It's marketed to us as health food, and this is what we should choose. And of course, there's all these magic words that we find on it, like gluten-free and non-GMO and all this stuff. And so it makes us want to purchase. It's just marketing. But what our body recognizes is what actually comes from nature. And now we can continue to expand on that. It's so interesting because I always say that on the outside, things always look for certain people like it happened so easily. There was no struggle. They must have been so lucky. Life is so lucky for them. And as many other stories, mine actually took a little bit of a turn when I was a teenager. And I actually found health and fitness by accident. And the reason why I say that is because when I had found health and fitness at the time, I was actually studying chemistry. I was doing my master's degree in chemistry. And so this was a very, very big turning moment. But here's the story. When I was growing up, I was super involved in sports, and I was that tomboy that was always competing against the boys in class, trying to outrun them, out push up them. And eventually I got into competitive swimming. I was in all varsity sports. And by the time I got into high school, I was in varsity track and field and volleyball and basketball, and generally MVP for most of the sports that I was engaged in. And one day, I was 16 years old, I was actually in boarding school. I went downtown with my roommate to purchase Pearl Jam tickets. And as we were trying to run back to grab the bus to get on campus, because we had to check in at a certain time, I was struck by a car. And I was didn't see it coming. I was actually concussed because when I first woke up and regained consciousness, I was in the hospital, and that's when my roommate had told me what had happened. And so when I came back to sports a couple weeks later, this was actually basketball season, I didn't really realize what had happened. I thought I just had some abrasions on my face, some bruises, some scratches. But then as I started to get back into training, I started to experience a lot of pain in my right glute that eventually just got more and more intense until it went all the way down my leg, and I couldn't walk. I couldn't shower on my own. I couldn't go up the stairs. And I had to go back home to visit my parents, and I saw a doctor. And that's when I realized that I had actually damaged my spine as a result of this accident. And I needed to have an emergency back surgery because the entire sciatic nerve on my right leg was completely compressed. And so after I had my surgery, my doctor sat me down and told me, Sherry, you're not allowed to play sports again. This is your back is can't handle it. This is not going to be for you. And maybe, as he suggested, what could potentially be something that I could actually engage in is light walking on a treadmill. If I were to ever become pregnant one day, this could create a lot of issues in my back. And so this was one bitter pill to swallow, to hear that I wouldn't play sports. Like, this was my identity. This is how I always envisioned myself. And so I listened to the advice and just slowly started to find myself needing a new crowd, a new social environment. And I ended up spending time with those people that parents tell you not to hang out with and not to participate in certain habits with. And so this kind of went on for the first sort of few years of my 20s until I just woke up one day with this massive aha moment, this realization that I am not in alignment with who I was always meant to be. This is not me. I couldn't recognize myself. I had a lot of self-loathing. And it was at this point that I decided to sign up at a local gym, even though I was relying on pain medications every single day. My whole world revolved around my back, how long I would sit, where I would go, if I needed a place to lie down. But I signed up at the gym, and again, at this point, I was studying chemistry, doing my master's degree. And so all I did was just copy people, and I had no idea what I was doing or why I was doing it. I just saw people do certain exercises and I just copied them. And I stayed consistent for a few months until eventually I started to notice that my back pain was gone and I was able to come off my pain medication. I ended up buying a treadmill and slowly started to work my way up to running 60 minutes nonstop, and then eventually be able to do that outdoors. And the moment I achieved that, Jessica, that's where my whole world changed. I dropped out of my master's degree in chemistry. I went back to school and studied exercise science. I certified as an athletic therapist, and I eventually became an osteopath. And it hit me, it dawned on me that this was my calling, that I wanted to help people overcome obstacles, because we all have something. We all have something that's standing in our way, whether that's an injury like mine, or limiting beliefs around what we're able to do, or a dis-ease that we're managing, or even a struggle with weight. And so by learning that the body has its innate capacity to heal itself, that has an inner wisdom and intelligence, and that when we learn to tune in to those signals, to those messages, then we can refine that alignment and then create the life that we deserve.
Hmm. What a story. I want to touch on the injury for a little bit, if that's okay, because that really resonates with me in my motor vehicle accident. And see, I woke up in the hospital. I don't remember the accident. I woke up in the hospital and then I was handed. So I had a severe traumatic brain injury, broke my neck, broke my pelvis. And so for me in that hospital bed, it was like, okay, this is what I have. And now it's all up from here. Like I can only get better here. Like I was so close to death. But when I hear of stories of people who had concussions, where at the beginning they were discharged from the hospital, it seems like you're fine. And then slowly you start to lose the abilities. And I can't even imagine like the kind of agony that that must be, just slowly moving. And I mean, I've experienced some sort of almost like a lack of faith or almost like a distrust in my own body after the accident because I didn't understand like why couldn't I move my leg the way that I did before? Or why didn't it respond? It's like I didn't have that brain leg connection or so how did you navigate like having that distrust in your body and then ultimately like working with the body today. And as you're saying, like the body has its own is inner wisdom. So can you explain, like, can you share what that journey was like in discovering that?
Right. Yeah, it's so easy right now to say, you know what, I was so positive and I overcame all these things, and the truth is it was a major struggle. I had my dark moments. I had my moments of hope. And so that is part of the journey. And that's, I think, something we all need to hear, is that even when we hear a success story, we have to understand that behind that was a lot of struggle. There was a lot of pain. And speaking of pain, and this is really the turning point for any of us to make a big decision in our life. We psychologically make decisions based on how we can move away from pain and move towards pleasure. And so, as I talk about pain and pleasure, by the way, it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical one. It could be anything that is something we don't want to experience, something that we don't want to avoid, that we want to avoid rather. And so, for me, yes, I was at the moment experiencing a lot of back pain, but the pain of knowing that I needed to always rely on someone to do something for me, or that I felt that I was disempowered in my own body, was much greater. And so that was the driving force. And so when we are allowing others to tell us what we can or cannot do, and I say this so respectfully because I really am grateful for the doctor's intervention and for helping me give me my life back. And I also come from a string of doctors. Both my parents were doctors, my brother is a doctor. And so I say this so respectfully. But what's super interesting is we've come to this point where we no longer actually listen to the messages that our body's giving us. We're oftentimes hearing what other people tell us that our body should or should not do. And this is something we want to move away from, because we have pain sensors for a reason, and we have intuition for a reason. And the more that we explore this, the more that we really focus on what it is that we're wanting to move towards and move away from, we can realign with those messaging. And also, as I say this, I want to share that when I did go back to the gym in my early 20s, I wasn't deadlifting a bus. My plan wasn't to try to compete. I was really just trying to rebuild my strength, restabilize my body. And so that meant that I was really, really in tune with that constant pain. And our body gives us pain in information. And when we learn to distinguish what this information is from what I call fake pain and real pain, it gives us a lot more feeling of support or certainty around what decision that we can make. And here's what I mean. So, fake pain is that type of pain that goes away once we stop exercising or once we stop doing that thing. So let's say, for example, you're running and all of a sudden you feel a cramp in your right side, and then all of a sudden you stop running, it goes away. Or you're lifting weights, or you're doing cardio and you feel that burn, and all of a sudden you stop doing that activity and then it goes away. So that's fake pain. Fake pain is a type of pain that goes away when the activity stops. Now, real pain, now that's something to pay attention to. Real pain is the pain that is always there, no matter what position we're in. It's there when we sleep, it's there constantly lingering if we're at rest or when we are doing activity. And that's the type of pain that I was tuned into. I wanted to make sure that I was monitoring that pain, that it wasn't increasing, that it wasn't all of a sudden taking over my whole day, which it did in the past. And so the moment, again, that we tap into the body's signals and we are able to distinguish between fake pain and real pain, it becomes much easier then to know how much to do or when we're needing to back off.
Hmm. So are you saying like the fake pain, let's say you would feel fake pain, would you keep working out anyways? Or then would you be like, hey, no, that's enough?
Yeah, that's the type of pain that I know, okay, Sherry,
Okay.
come on, like just push through this, right? And whereas the real pain, I mean, that again, that was the cue to, okay, relax here, back off, you need to stop, because that one rep is not going to give you anything except maybe pain for a couple weeks that is going to be hard to manage.
Right, right. Yeah. So at what point did the real pain start to minimize, or did you notice that it started to minimize?
Yeah, so before I decided to commit to the gym, my day really looked like, okay, I wake up in the morning, my back hurts. My back is always on my mind. I have to be careful how to bend over because my back hurts. How long am I going to sit because my back hurts? And I know that if I sit for over 30 minutes, my back's going to hurt. And then what kind of car am I going to ride in? Because if I sit in a Jeep and it's super bumpy, that's going to hurt my back. And if I'm going to a social event, I have to ask the host if there's a place for me to lie down because I always needed to lie down. I couldn't sit for a long time. I would even take classes and I would ask the teacher, is do you mind if I lie down in the classroom? Like, I won't disrespect you, I'm not trying to, I just have back issues. And so that was my world. So I went from that to slowly noticing that I'm not actually thinking about my back as much, that I'm actually experiencing less pain, that I can sit longer, that I feel comfortable folding forward without there being this sharp pain or maybe days in bed that would follow. And so just noticing that it was alleviating, and then eventually to the point where I don't think I need to take my pain medication today, was sort of the progression until it got to the point where I no longer even think about my back. And today I live my life completely not even aware that I had back issues because my focus has just shifted elsewhere and it's no longer on the body. And the reason why I will stay consistent with my training is not because I have to, but because I get to. And it's always that reminder that because I'm strong and I've created stability in my body, I'm also pain free.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's incredible. And now you own like multiple gyms and you call everybody an athlete. Can you share why is it that you believe that everybody is an athlete?
Yeah, so good. And interesting now. I since the pandemic, I've actually taken a lot of my programs online. I've launched the HitDex app, and on the podcast, even I call people athletes, and you'll see this everywhere. And an athlete is a mindset, except we actually think that an athlete is a person who gets paid a lot of money to appear on TV to play their sport professionally, right? And that's generally the association that we have. But an athlete is a mindset. An athlete is focused on the being and not the doing. And here's what I mean. Most people, when they sign up at a gym or they try a new fitness program, or it's the New Year's resolution, or they're turning the big 4-0 or 5-0 or whatever that is, oftentimes their motivation behind why they want to do that is to change their physical appearance. It's because they feel like they are flawed in some way or they want to change their physical body. And oftentimes that's done in a way that is not empowering. Oftentimes the reason why we engage or we decide that, okay, this year it's going to be, Sherry 2024. It's because I'm not okay with how I look. And there's a lot of negative self talk. There's a lot of negative self image. And that's the reason why I want to change things. And so exercise becomes a means to release weight. It becomes almost a punishment for what we ate the day before or for how we believe we look. And the same thing with nutrition. Again, it's used as a method to try to manipulate the body because we're not okay with who we are. We don't have self-love. We're actually trying to change how we look or how we feel because we're not satisfied with that. Whereas an athlete doesn't focus on these things. An athlete doesn't focus on physical appearance. An athlete focuses on training, not exercise, because training is how they continue to practice. They're training for something. They're practicing for this big life event or this big competition, right? Or it's just a part of their day-to-day living. It's a part of who they are. And so an athlete doesn't go to a gym because they're focused on how many calories they're going to burn. An athlete goes to the gym because they're focused on performance. It's about pushing the body or getting curious around what the body can do. And the same thing with nutrition. An athlete doesn't focus on nutrition because it's a means to release weight or it's a punishment for how they look, but they focus on nutrition because it offers better quality of sleep. It helps them recover after training. It helps them prepare for the next training. And so it's a very different way to look at fitness and nutrition, and it's not focused on physical appearance. The side effect of showing up every single day and training because you want to perform or improve your performance and choosing foods that serve you because you see the direct impact on your training, the exact and direct side effect of that is a transformation in the physical body. And so, again, the motivation is very different. When we commit to really changing our mindset, our philosophy, and our identity around how we train, how we move, how we eat, and understand that diet is not just what we're putting in our mouth, but diet is actually everything that enters our being, our consciousness, which could be what we watch on TV. It could be the conversations that we sit down in. It could be the amount of fear that we're exposed to. And it could be anything that essentially gives us any sort of change in our body. And again, it's not just through the nutrition, but it's through everything else that we're exposed to. And that now starts to shed a very, very different light around why we're doing things and how we can use that mindset to empower us to stay consistent.
Yeah, I love that. I talk a lot about self-image, like as a certified mindset coach. And I really do believe everything does begin with the identity that we're holding in, like inside our minds. And so what I get my clients to do is really build that end result image. Like, who would you be when you have achieved all of those results? And can you start embodying that version of yourself now? What does it look like for you when you take your clients through in really embodying like the identity and the mindset of that person that they want to be?
Yeah, so beautiful. And, you know, the first thing we have to understand before we even can create that vision is the power of language and how every single thought that we have creates chemistry in the body. And the reason why this is so important is because as we talk about identity, it's all based on our thoughts. It's our self concept is what we believe about ourselves to be true. And so, if, for example, my goal this year is to release 30 pounds and I've decided to sign up with a trainer. I'm seeing my trainer 3 times a week. I've changed my nutrition. And yet the internal dialogue is always, oh my God, Sherry, this is never going to work. You're so bad at this. You're so slow. Look how out of shape you are. You're so gross. You're so nasty. And these are, by the way, what I'm sharing with you right now. This is what a lot of us are internally dialoguing all day long, unaware. Whether we're about to go meet a stranger or meet a person, or maybe we're on a date or we're about to give a big talk in front of a lot of people, there's a lot of negative self-talk. And so there's no alignment in that. If I'm trying to create that mindset around that athletic mindset, and yet my internal dialogue is always that I can't do it or it's not going to be possible for me, well, that will always win. And so what we end up doing unconsciously is we validate whatever our self-concept is. So whatever I think I am about myself, whatever I think my truth is, unconsciously throughout the day, all of my actions that I take are going to support that. And so as we create this identity, and what I do is this process called future self mapping. So similar to what you shared, where you do have a vision of what your future self is. And that is very much based on what is sustainable for you and, of course, what is achievable for you. And once you have that image, you can then reverse engineer where you are now and start to do what I call habit stacking. So we follow the rule of addition first before subtraction. And so let's say, for example, my goal again is to release 30 pounds. Instead of focusing on how I'm going to release 30 pounds, what I'll do instead is I'm going to shift into how can I become the person who is 30 pounds lighter? Because diets don't work. When I'm focusing on just releasing a certain number, what ends up happening is the moment I achieve it, I stop working on it because we're so goal oriented. That's what we do when we set up a goal. The moment we achieve the goal, we stop working. But instead, when we shift into who do I have to become to be the person, I can now start to look at all of my life, not just the weight that I want to release, but what does my entire lifestyle look like? What time do I wake up in the morning? What's the first thing I do when I wake up? What is the amount of movement I get throughout my day? What do I have as my first meal? What kind of books am I reading? What kind of people am I spending time with? What are the conversations I'm sitting in? And as I start to create this avatar of the future self, I can now also create a whole bunch of habits that I can try on for size. And so, if I'm not really sure what that could look like, and I don't really know how to create that future self version because I've always only known and lived my current life and I don't know anything else outside of that, I'll always recommend to reach out to somebody that you admire who maybe is your mentor, someone that you model, and then start to ask them questions, start to get an idea around what do they do in their day-to-day life. And with those habits, you can now start to schedule it. And so as you schedule one habit at a time, before you move into the next one, just make sure that you master that. And so to become the person, let's say, who's 30 pounds lighter, maybe that means it's 15,000 steps a day or 10,000 steps a day. Maybe that means starting with 2 liters of water, where right now I'm not drinking any water. Maybe that means I have to add more leafy greens and colors into my meals, which I'm not really doing right now. Maybe I have to stop eating a few hours before bed to allow for digestion and restful sleep. And now, as we start to pile in all these habits, now they become more tangible. And what's more important than just a long term goal or just an outcome focused goal is really understanding that we want to focus on the system. Because if we can create a system, which is my lifestyle, then I never have to worry about struggling with weight or struggling with anything else in my life simply because I'm doing all the things that are enjoyable to me, that are sustainable to me, and that actually fit into who I am.
I love the way that you explained that, and it opened up so many more questions for me. So thank you for all of that. The first thing that I think I would really like to like paint the picture of when you're talking about stacking habits and okay, that person, the 30-pound lighter self, there's so many things that I need to do right now. How many habits do you suggest that people change at a time? Because obviously, I mean, trying to do 10 habits, that's just a recipe for discouragement.
Yeah, so good. And this is a really powerful question. And the way that I'd answer that is really to know yourself, because you have to understand your personality type. There are some people that really are cold turkey type people. So overnight they can make a lot of changes, and that's just how they roll. Whereas other people, it works better when it's one at a time. And this is something that I'll always say, regardless of what type of person that you are, just don't move on to the next thing until you feel like you've mastered it. And so, if that's one or two habits, make sure that they're also maybe in different areas of your life. So, maybe one habit is I'm going to wake up a little bit earlier in the morning, and the other one is I'm going to add more water in my day. Instead of having two habits that are also around what I call the fitness sphere, where you're working on certain things around fitness. I'm going to work out 5 days a week with my trainer, and I'm going to run 4 days a week. Right. So that's too much in that area. So if you want to add in more than one habit, it could even be I'm going to turn off blue lights at night, right? That's something that maybe could be more reasonable for me. And I could start focusing on that. And maybe also I will start adding in more steps in my day. Maybe I will actually put away my laundry one article at a time instead of the whole basket at a time. And so trying to get more creative around how you could also add in these habits also helps to make them more possible.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love that. And just really knowing yourself and what you can handle. You also talked about like hormones and like I want to go back to some of these like negative thoughts that we have that are very much unconscious. What is the relation with like our negative thoughts, which generate the hormones, which then can lead to weight gain, right?
Yeah, so good, so good. So we'll come back then to the chemistry of thought. And what we don't oftentimes realize again is that every single thought that we have in our mind creates chemistry in the body. So we have a thought, and what happens is that there's a neurotransmitter that's released in the brain that matches that thought, because every thought is energy, and every type of thought has its particular frequency, which is going to match a particular neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter is going to send a neuropeptide, which is a protein, which is a signal molecule, to an area in the body, so a nerve bundle, or we also call it an energy center or a chakra, if you will. And in that area, then there is a hormone that's going to be released. And so I know this sounds like really, really, really far out there. And then the one way that I want to just bring it all in and make it a bit more tangible is to ask the question, what happens when we have a sexual thought? Well, we know that if we have a sexual thought, just that thought in itself is going to turn on a particular area in the body. We know that it's going to activate a particular center. And so if we can see this, and if we know that every single time we watch those cooking shows, we get hungry because we activate that center, or we watch a scary movie, and then all of a sudden we get scared because we activate that center. So we realize that through our five senses, we pick up information from our environment that gives us a thought. The only way that we have thoughts is through the five senses. That's actually what gives us a thought. So through that process, we're going to create that thought, which is going to result in chemistry in the body. And so every single thought also is associated with a particular nervous system state. And so what I refer to as sympathetic nervous state is protection mode, because there are many things that happen in the body besides just some of the physical processes that we learn through school. Protection mode actually impacts our thoughts, it impacts our feelings, our emotions, as well as our actions. And then I refer to parasympathetic nervous state as safety mode. And in safety mode, that is where our body also is experiencing another level of thought, another level of emotion, as well as behavior. So the way that behavior actually is perpetuated in the body, it always starts with the five senses. The five senses trigger a thought. The thought gives rise to an emotion. The emotion is going to drive an action, and the action is going to drive a behavior. Now, if we repeat that behavior over and over and over and over again, we've created a habit, and a habit is a pattern. It's just something that we are running unconsciously in our mind. Whether it serves us or not, it becomes addictive, as they call it, because it's so habitual. We're just used to it. And we love certainty. It's one of our 6 human needs. And so what we want to do is continue to stay with the familiar, because oftentimes the unknown brings us feelings of fear and uncertainty. And so coming back to those negative thoughts. So again, if we've all agreed that we can watch a scary movie and that impacts us, or we can watch something sad and that impacts us, or again, we can turn on our first center if we are having sexual thoughts. Well, every single time we have a negative thought, especially if it's self-deprecating, especially if we are negatively talking about ourselves, we have to also understand that this is turning on and turning off certain areas in the body and producing the chemistry that's going to support that. I mean, nobody feels super happy and ecstatic and then also feels heavy, right? So nobody feels that they are sad and depressed, but then also at the same time feeling very positive, right? Those are very, very conflicting emotions. And whatever emotion we're in, again, it's going to influence the action that we're going to take. And so if I, again, have signed up at a gym, I'm seeing my trainer a few times a week, I'm doing all the things, but my negative self-talk is always there. That's something I haven't addressed. Well, no matter what I do, I'm going to trigger protection mode, because when I speak negatively to myself, what I'm actually doing is I am triggering my fight or flight response. It's like I'm being attacked. Whether someone else is saying these things to me or I'm saying them to myself, my nervous system reacts in the same way. And so as I continue to negatively self-talk, I trigger protection mode. Protection mode, or sympathetic nervous state, the response in the body is to slow down metabolism. First and foremost, that's what happens. When we are in protection mode, our body's main focus and function is to survive. And the way that we can ensure our survival is by slowing down our metabolism to conserve energy. And then the second thing that happens is that we're going to have more cravings to eat. And this is a very primitive reptilian part of the brain that is operating. And again, the only objective is survival. And the way to ensure survival is to make sure that our body's reserves for energy can last as long as possible. And so the way that we used to do that in the past when we were hunter gatherers, the moment that we triggered protection mode, oftentimes it meant that there was a threat in the environment that was real. What we had to do is likely find a new food source. And it likely also meant that we had to migrate to a newer, safer area. And so, as we are in protection mode, we slow down the metabolism to conserve energy. And now we start to move, which starts to feel heavy because we want to move slower. We don't want to release as much energy. Again, we want to conserve that energy. And the moment that we finally find a food source, we trigger this part of the brain that is responsible for binging. And this is a natural response that we all have. We have this ability to conserve energy, but then also the moment that we finally have access to food, we have to be able to feast without any block. We have to be able to eat as if it's a bottomless pit. And that's how we're able to do that, because we have survived and we have evolved to be able to go through periods of famine and then to be able to have as much food as possible when there is the opportunity to do that in a feast.
Mm-hmm. It's so fascinating. Thank you for explaining all of that. That was really well done. I'm just curious. So when you have these thoughts, it slows down the metabolism. Like what if, like, let's say someone is going on a diet, they tried all the diets, but they're still not losing the weight. Like they're not binging, but they're still having those thoughts because they haven't addressed the identity piece. Like, could that be why they're not experiencing any of the like desired results with, the diets that they're going on? Now, I know you are anti-diet, so I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, such a great question. Yes, great question, Jessica.
Thank you.
So I want to just actually step away from that and just look at the whole picture, because yes, this could be, for example, something that is slowing down their metabolism, something that they've continued to do, so the chronic dieting that has triggered protection mode and they're chronically stuck in protection mode. But anybody who is experiencing self-sabotage, who has a struggle to release weight, and the self-sabotage is really, I got results and then all of a sudden I do something to go all the way back to where I started, or I find a way somehow to use an excuse or a life event to suddenly interrupt what I'm doing. So anyone who's experiencing that, anyone who is yo-yo dieting, anybody who is constantly noticing that for them, generally this is a very challenging place and they're always struggling in this area. I am so certain that it is the nervous system issue that is really at play here. And what I mean by that is we are chronically stuck in protection mode. And so the way that we trigger protection mode, yes, it could be through chronic dieting, as you shared. And many other ways that we trigger protection mode is anytime we feel unsafe in our environment in general. So those of us, for example, who unfortunately had to endure a level of abuse anytime in their life, and they haven't made maybe efforts or have actually addressed it and how to overcome that trauma, are likely still trapped in that place. And the body does this great thing, which is adaptation. The body's able to adapt to anything. In fact, it wants to do that. It's always looking for homeostasis. So even though at 6 or 7 or 8 years old, you went through a major traumatic event, and even though it's not on your mind right now, your body could still be stuck in that nervous system state, in protection mode, because energy is still trapped in the body from that experience. And so we can trigger protection mode due to a sexual trauma, a physical trauma, an emotional trauma. But then other traumas that we don't oftentimes acknowledge is food scarcity. And food scarcity can either be real or imposed. Real food scarcity is growing up, for example, legitimately without food. And maybe we grew up in foster homes, or maybe we had a single parent who worked 3 jobs, who did her best to put food on the table. And yet that still meant we went to bed hungry many times, or we had to share one donut between 4 or 5 siblings. And these are all, by the way, true stories of people who join our programs, Make Peace with Food. Now, imposed food scarcity, that's through dieting. That is us restricting. That is us creating imposition. And what we notice that happens oftentimes when that's prolonged is we trigger protection mode. So through this wanting or needing to change our body, most of us look for diets. And so, even though it may have started or I may have triggered protection mode due to a traumatic event in my life, the result of the weight gain that had happened or resulted from that drove me then to look for a way to manage that. And generally, the way that we look for that, again, is through dieting, through trying to address the food instead of the root cause, which is the nervous system that's constantly triggering us to stay in this cycle. And so, to answer your question, if we really want to break this pattern, we have to stop dieting. And this can be scary for many people, especially if they've been in this space for a long time, if they've struggled with their weight for a long time, or it's a big goal for them, or then maybe they have health issues that they are needing to address. And so, when we do stop focusing on diets, we actually are able to get out of the mind and into the body to listen to the body's natural cues. And that's now getting more intuitive. But before we get into intuitive eating, again, what we first have to do is really focus on stopping the restriction and then addressing the nervous system. And when we address the nervous system, it's exactly what we spoke about here before. There are many tools that I share in my program, Make Peace with Food. But essentially, what we're doing is we're shifting the nervous system from protection mode to safety mode. When we're in protection mode, our thoughts are generally focused on worst case scenarios, right? So if we're not feeling safe in our environment, we're always thinking about things that are going to give us worry, anxiety, uncertainty, fear, doubt, right? And when we are in safety mode, then that's where we're now calm, we're creative, we're at peace, we're at rest, we're really able to expand our level of thinking. When we're in protection mode, it's very tunnel vision. We're only focused on that one thing. But when we're in safety mode, now there's opportunity and we're feeling calm, we're feeling peaceful, we're feeling relaxed, we're feeling grateful. And so once we're able to get into that place, now we can start to make changes around nutrition. Now we can start to make changes around fitness. And now you have a matching nervous system that is ready to really support you and work with you instead of against you.
Just hearing you speak, I feel like it's almost making me almost sad for the body. Like when you're saying like these imposed diets, and it's almost like we're creating trauma within our own body. And it's like the mind could make like such devastating things on the body when we don't really understand that it's like the whole. And sometimes I like to think that like, our mind is like the caretaker for our body, right? Like take it for a walk, make sure it's well hydrated. Like our body, just like you're saying, it just wants to get to homeostasis. It's always rooting for us. And sometimes the mind can get so much in the way. We end up just almost like abusing our body. Anyways, it makes me emotional to think about.
You're so right. It's so true. And it's our natural almost default to go to the negative, right? Because
Mhm,
we're always feeling like we're not enough. We're always in the scarcity mindset. And the only way really out of that is just awareness, right?
mhm.
It's to really consciously program this. And so we talk about I am statements, we talk about affirmations, we talk about gratitude. And this is a practice. Again, it's a daily practice. We don't just go to the dentist once a year, get our teeth cleaned, and then go there again the following year expecting that we're going to maintain those results, right? We have to keep working on it. And what's really wild, Jessica, is if we all right now go on YouTube and start or searching. I was going to say Googling because everything is Googling these days.
Yeah.
But we start to search the impact of negative talk on plants. On plants.
Mhm.
I mean, that is astounding. So there are many experiments that they've conducted where, not just on plants, but also on water, where they spoke to a group of plants nicely, so with beautiful words, love and kindness. And then they spoke to another group of plants with a lot of the nasty words, probably some of the words that we use to describe ourselves. And then they had, of course, another group that was completely neutral. And all of these groups got the exact same amount of sunlight, the exact same conditions. There was absolutely no change except the way that these plants were spoken to. And it is wild. It is wild to really see what the impact of negative talk on a plant is. Now imagine on our body. And if we've been in this space for so long, maybe it's time to question that. Has this negative self talk ever brought me to anywhere I wanted to be? Has it actually given me any value in my life? Or has it always made me feel worse and worse and worse and worse? And actually, I've noticed that I'm going in the opposite direction that I actually want to go towards.
Mhm. Yeah, that's powerful. Like the negative talk on plants, it's kind of making me think of the food chain too, because I mean, like the crops, even like the animals, all of that, right? Like that's still all energy that we're feeding into. So, kind of, this leads me into something that I read on your website, and you said food is 85% how you look, feel, and perform. And I feel like this can kind of go both ways. So, is it like, the food that we choose to eat is based on how we look, feel, and perform? Or is it that literally the food that we eat then creates how we look, feel, and perform? Like, in which way do you mean it?
Yeah, and it can go both ways because that really is what it is, right? And what we don't also realize these days is that the majority of what we eat is not actually food, it's food like substance, right? And it's marketed as to us in many ways. It's marketed to us as health food, and this is what we should choose. And of course, there's all these magic words that we find on it, like gluten-free and non-GMO and all this stuff. And so it makes us want to purchase. It's just marketing. But what our body recognizes is what actually comes from nature. And now we can continue to expand on that, right? Because exactly what you said earlier, Jessica, it's also how we are raising our animals, it's how we're raising our food. And the way that we're doing it now is not ethical for the most part, and it's not natural, right? To try to grow things as quickly as possible, to try to really focus on profit versus people. That is exactly how our food is being presented to us. And so by understanding that our body requires these building blocks to recover itself, to heal itself, to build new membranes, to create enzymes and hormones, it also then becomes very obvious that it has to have certain components in order for us to be able to do that. And so by giving our body what it needs, foods that serve it, eating more of that and less of the foods that don't serve it, now we start to see a change. And again, to expand on diet is not just the food, right? We could be eating organic and yet we're in a toxic relationship. That's going to
Mhm.
impact our health. And health in general is a balance between the relationship with our body, the relationship with others, and then the relationship with self. And so all of those components play a massive, massive role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we get into intuitive eating a little more? How can people really start intuitively eating? What does that look like?
Oh, so good. I love this question. And then I also want to say that this word right now, intuitive eating, has unfortunately taken some twists and turns that have, I want to almost say, bastardized it. And I say this again so respectfully. And the reason why I say this is because as consumers, as people who are on the search for information, we always have to stand on guard at the door of our mind before we learn or accept any information that we see online, and just realize that anybody can talk about anything. And so all this to say is, please, please, as you start to learn information, just find out where this person got their information. And so if you go on Instagram and you hashtag intuitive eating, you may come across some people, as I have, who are eating donut after donut and pizza and all these non-food like substances and saying this is intuitive eating and this is intuitive eating and eating this pizza is also intuitive eating. And that's not intuitive eating. That is really pushing processed foods, right?
Mhm.
Intuitive eating is understanding and acknowledging that our body has what is called appetite control. When we are born, we have the ability to call for food when we're hungry and then to stop eating once we're full and satisfied. Now enter diet culture and then enter influence in our upbringing. Maybe mom always made me finish off my plate and I couldn't leave the table unless my plate was finished. Or maybe mom always rewarded me with ice cream every single time I did something great, or rewarded me with ice cream every time I had a bad day. And so all of these learned behaviors now start to override appetite control. And intuitive eating just means that we're coming back to those natural signals. And if we were to naturally listen to our body, the signals that our body is actually giving off, our body's not asking us to eat 6, 7, 8, or 9 donuts in a row. Maybe every now and then we might have a little craving for something sweet, but you'll notice that it doesn't take much to satisfy that. And so intuitive eating is getting into those body signals where you're able to tap into hunger. You're able also to notice what you're craving for. When you're eating intuitively, some days you're going to actually crave more greens. Some days you're going to crave more veggies and maybe more raw foods. Other days, maybe it looks more starchy. But it's all signals that your body is continuing to send you based on what it's doing that day, based on what's in the environment. And then similarly, your body's also going to be able to tell you when you've had enough and when you feel satisfied. And it also expands a little bit further than that because you'll also pick up your hydration cues, even elimination. Once you start to monitor your elimination, our urine and our poop tells us a lot about our health. And all of that is intuitive eating. And so, if you're really wanting to get into intuitive eating, the first step is to stop restricting, stop dieting, just observe all of the beliefs that you have about food. Maybe you think that you need a certain amount of protein, or otherwise you're going to lose all your muscle overnight. Maybe you believe that carbohydrates are very bad for you. Maybe you believe certain things about certain foods. And so, just get into what your belief systems are and then question them. Where did this come from? Right? And then, if I really want to break this belief, can I find proof of the exact opposite? Right? So if I hear that carbs are very quote unquote bad for us, well, let me look at what's happening in third world countries where almost 80 or 90% of what they're consuming is carbohydrates. And let's see what kind of diseases they have there. And so as we start to break down all these beliefs, we actually are able to tap more into what our body is actually signaling for. And so that's the process of intuitive eating. It's not pushing and promoting more junk food. It really is moving away from dieting, but more importantly, listening to what your body needs. And if you're truly listening to the signals that your body needs, it's always going to ask for food that it can recognize and, more importantly, utilize for all the functions that it carries out throughout the day.
Hmm. Yeah, and so it sounds like before even attempting to intuitive eating, really give yourself like the mental check and the mindful practices. Because I'm thinking, if you're not in tune with your body, like you can be following your cravings, but it's not necessarily the right thing. Like I'm thinking, you might cringe at this, Sherry, sorry, but like sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm really craving sweets. So I eat all the sweets and I'm like, oh no, now I need something salty to counteract the sweets. And it's like, okay, chips, popcorn, and now it's like, oh, well, now I need sweets to like, and it's just like that yo-yo all the time. So not really good to follow those cravings without actually checking yourself first.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point, and it's there's no good or bad, right? So that's also the other thing that we want to move away from, because every time we say, oh, this is good to eat, this is bad to eat, what we do is also we attach a charge to that food. We polarize that food, which basically means if I eat the good things according to my list, I feel good about myself, I feel worthy, and I love myself. And if I eat the bad things, then I feel very bad about myself. And now I can't believe I failed. What's wrong with me? Why did I do that? And now, boom, I triggered protection mode, and I probably want more of that food. But when we're intuitive eating, we start to notice hunger. And hunger is very, very different than, let's say, emotional hunger. So when we're intuitively eating, we can start to distinguish between the body's hunger or physical hunger versus emotional hunger, or what I also call mind hunger. Now, real hunger, physical hunger, the body's hunger, you notice that there's a slow onset and then it slowly and gradually builds up. You'll feel rumbling in the stomach. You'll actually feel it where it's at in the stomach. And if you continue to stay hungry, you'll notice that these signals get more and more intense. Eventually, you might get a headache. You might feel lightheaded. So all these things happen when we're hungry. And when we're really actually physically hungry, then we're kind of open to a lot of options. Sushi? Yeah, I'll go for sushi. Oh, yeah, you want to go for a big salad? Yeah, I'll go for a big salad. You want to go for Mexican? Yeah, I'll go for Mexican, right? Whereas when it's emotional hunger, it is immediate onset. It could even be that we just ate, but all of a sudden now we're immediately, urgently needing this very, very specific thing. What's the other thing about emotional hunger? It's very, very specific. And not only is it specific, but most likely it is foods that are high in calorie, high in energy, that can give us immediate access to energy. And so emotional hunger won't be satisfied by anything else, right? If I want chocolate, I have to have chocolate now. There's nothing else. No, I don't want chips. It has to be chocolate. It has to be exactly this chocolate. We are very specific about the texture. We're very specific about the taste. We're very specific about the look. Everything about it is very specific, and it's very, very urgent. Nothing else will satisfy that. There's no rumbling in the stomach. There's just this obsession, and generally it's focused on foods that don't serve us. And so when we're intuitively eating, again, those are the cues that we can start to look into. Emotional hunger also, we can let that pass. If we learn how to manage our emotions, whether that's boredom, even, or sadness, or even joy, any of those emotions that generally tend to be linked to food, we can start to interrupt that pattern if we give ourselves just a few minutes to override that urge to eat.
Yeah, absolutely. When you talk about urge to eat, I recognize that sometimes I think I'm hungry, but I'm actually thirsty. And I
Yes.
hear that a lot. So, how can people really distinguish the signals? Is it hunger or is it thirst?
Yeah, so good. And you're absolutely right. So one of the things that I'll always suggest is that we maybe go for water first and maybe even intentionally schedule the amount of water that we want to consume per day. And that's what I have to personally do. I get really lost in my day sometimes, and it could be the afternoon and I realize I didn't drink any water. And so I'll start off the morning with a big glass of water. Before I have coffee, I'm a coffee drinker. Before I have anything else, I start my day with water. And then I continue to have beverages as well that are very hydrating. So I'll have a lot of teas that don't have caffeine, and that's just something that I'll consume throughout the day. And the other thing too is just to track it. So instead of tracking on a food journal or an app that's going to count your calories or ask you how well you did that day, instead tracking very, very basic things. So I have a wellness log, for example, that I share. And this is where you can track how much water you drink per day. This can track how many steps, for example, how much movement you had per day. This also can track what you consumed throughout every single meal, as well as how you felt afterwards. And how you felt is really more of the emotional component. It's that ability to distinguish between, is this mind or emotional hunger versus body physical hunger. And then also just monitoring where you are on the food scale. And so if you want to start to just look at these things, because we can't heal or we can't change what we're not aware of. So first step is become aware. How much water am I drinking? Oh my, like I only had 2 glasses today, right? Wow, on average I barely have 2 glasses. Or maybe I just drink soda and coffee all day and I don't actually have water. And so start there and just start to add in more water. Just take a little audit of how much water you consume throughout your day and start to add that in. And you know you're at the sweet spot when you're noticing that your urine is a pale color. So you don't want completely dark or orange urine. That oftentimes means that you are dehydrated, but you also don't want that super clear urine that you can barely see in the toilet either, because that also is overhydration, and that's also can create other issues, and we lose electrolytes and other things that can happen. And so you're always looking for that pale color.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing all of that. Thank you for sharing all of the value with us today. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I'd love to. And one thing I want to leave everyone with is that it is never too late. Oftentimes, many of us feel that we are too far gone, whether we are experiencing unwanted eating behavior, any other self sabotaging behavior, or maybe we've even lost sight of our health and we feel like we're at a certain age where it's just not recoverable. That is simply not true. All you have to do is get started. And don't think about what you want to do 6 months from now or 12 months from now. Just set goals 24 hours at a time. And remember, start with one habit, following the rule of addition first before subtraction. Before stopping to do certain habits that may be self sabotaging or non serving to you, start adding in those that are serving, that you do enjoy, that you can see are sustainable. And only add in the ones that you know for sure will be sustainable for you. And again, plan out 24 hours at a time. It is never too late. And I see this all the time, no matter what age, no matter how long you've been struggling with a certain thing, everything is possible. If there is a will, there is always a way.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you. Did you want to share where everyone can find you if they'd like to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Jessica. I really loved our time
Yeah.
together. You're an
Yeah,
amazing,
me too.
amazing host. So if you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on Instagram at Sherry Shaban Fitness is my handle. I have resources for you there, a way for you to connect. And then I also want to offer you a free workbook that I have on makepeacewithfood.com. So if you're struggling with any unwanted eating behavior, binge eating, emotional eating, stress eating, mindless eating, nighttime snacking, this is a great place for you to start, and a lot of self-work and just a place where you can really reflect as well and get started on your journey.
Amazing. Thank you so much. All of those links will be in the show notes of the episode, so be sure to check those out. Sherry, thank you so much for being here today. It was really so great having you.
Thank you so much. I loved it.